is the job of a question? What does a question do? What's its purpose? Anybody in here familiar with an organization called the Right Question Institute, by show of hands? Well, as a teaching member of the Institute, what if I told you they had charted the relationship between the number of questions students ask in school and their engagement levels in school? Why is it that over the course of our school career, reading and writing activities increase exponentially while students asking of questions falls off a cliff? And what does it say that during that same period, over our school careers, student engagement plummets by over 30%? You want to know something interesting about the power of a question by the time we get to college? Do you know there was a study done by researchers at Kutztown and Miami universities that discovered that college psychology students who were asked 4 simple questions just prior to their test score higher on their test? Want to know the 4 questions? What's one thing you've learned in this class? Why is what you've learned important? How can you apply what you've learned in your life? And what questions still remain? Now, what do you think the test scores were for the students that were asked those 4 questions before they went into their test? What if I told you in college that I knew a way for you to score 15% higher on your next exam? How does that work? What about here? How many new concepts and learning and ideas are we getting from this TEDx conference? If the TEDx organizers were to stop each of us on the way out or poll us online immediately after the conference and ask us, what's one thing you learned in this conference? Why is what you've learned important? How can you apply what you've learned in your life? And what questions still remain? Do you think our retention level of what we learn here would be higher? Are you willing to conduct a little live experiment with me here? How many, by show of hands, would say that over the next 6 months you intend to purchase a new car? Anybody? How many would say you intend to purchase a new car sometime within the next year? How about 2 to 3 years? Do you know we just increased car sales by 37% over the next 6 months among the members of this audience? Now, how is that possible? Before I tell you, can I ask you one more question? How many of you would be surprised to know that since I walked out onto this infamous red circle, I have yet to utter a single sentence that didn't end in a question mark? Would you believe me? How many of you can't wait to go back and watch the video and test me on this? Why would I do that? Do you think that it has commanded at least the slightest increase in your attention level to this talk? Do you think that maybe it would have created even the slightest increase in your retention level of this talk? Now, how many of you are ready for me to stop playing the question game? Okay, I'll stop. I promise I'll come back as well to the how we just increased car sales. But before I do, let me pause and give you a brief explanation of what's been happening in your brains over the last 5 minutes. Now, I'm not a scientist. I think the program or the website says I'm a strategic questioner, which sounds kind of like a scientist, but I'm not. The scientists will say that when we're asked a question, the brain releases a chemical called serotonin that has a relaxing effect on the brain. Now, you might think that questions actually raise tension and anxiety. And you might be right. If the stakes are high, if it's a courtroom witness stand or a job interview, that might be true. But when questions are framed properly and in the right context, the serotonin actually has a calming effect on the part of the brain that's needed to pursue the answers. And what happens is it frees your brain from all the other distractions of other thoughts. In fact, it makes your brain focus on the question. Neuroscientists call this instinctive elaboration. Would you like to experience instinctive elaboration? Okay, Without looking and without saying it out loud, what color are the shoes that you're wearing right now? Wait for it. You just experienced instinctive elaboration. I gave you no other choice but to think about the color of your shoes. None of you, when I asked that question, were thinking about where you're eating tonight or what you have on your plate at work next week. Why? Because the question literally made your brain incapable of thinking of anything else. That's the power of a question. Here's how it works, for example, in sports. If I'm a tennis coach trying to teach you how to hit a good tennis ball, I'm going to tell you over and over and over, keep your eye on the ball, keep your eye on the ball, keep your eye on the ball, because that's what you're supposed to look at when you play tennis. Now, the problem is we're not too good at following instructions when our brains are distracted by something else, like the sweat rolling into our eye or the net or the lines on the court. So an effective coach might change it up a little bit, and while he's hitting the ball to the tennis student, he might say, which direction is the ball spinning when it gets to your racket? Now, what's the first thing the tennis student has to do in order to answer that question? You got it. You got to look at the ball. The tennis coach literally freed their mind from the net and the opponent on the other side and the crowd and the lines and the racket positioning in their hand. You have to look at the ball. Now, not only does the coach now get the student to look at the ball, but now the student also understands a little bit about why they need to look at the ball. I'll give an example of how a question works in a real-life coaching situation. I was coaching a client, an insurance executive in Virginia a number of years ago, and she was having a conflict with a coworker. And she asked me, do you think it's time for me to take this to the CEO? Now, I could have answered it one way or the other, probably could have made a good case for either direction, but then I own the solution, good or bad, succeed or fail, and I don't want that. So I paused and asked her a question. I said, what would be the upsides and the downsides? She paused, and in just a few seconds, she started nodding, and she goes, man, you're right. I'm right? What did I say? I asked you a question. She said, no, but you're right. I definitely need to, I think I need to go to the CEO. I think it's time. I said, whoa. I did not tell you to go to the CEO. I'm asking you, what are the upsides and the downsides? She goes, no, I know, but you're right. 3 times she told me I was right. What was happening there? She knew the answer before she asked the question, but she didn't know she knew the answer. She needed the question to unlock the answer. That's how it works. Now, let me go back to our car experiment, because I promised you I'd tell you how we increased car sales by 37%. Actually, what we did is a small replication of a study done in 1993 by 3 researchers for the Journal of Consumer Research. And what they did is they had a control group and an experimental group, and in the experiment group, they asked them the same questions I asked you. Do you intend to purchase a car in the next 6 months, the next year, the next 2, 3 years? The experiment group that got asked those intention questions purchased cars over the next 6 months at a rate 37% higher than the control group. Here was the research question. Does measuring intent change behavior? Does measuring intent change behavior? Turns out it does, which is why plagiarism forms work in college. I remember the first time I filled out one of those pledges that I won't plagiarize and turned it in. I looked at my friends and I said, are you kidding me? They think this is really going to stop plagiarists? Is that a word? Turns out it does. It doesn't eliminate plagiarism, but it greatly reduces it. Why? Because they're measuring intent. Now, since we're talking about learning, let's back it up to when we're wee little kids. The study done by the Telegraph in the UK a number of years ago that found that the average 4-year-old in Britain asks over 300 questions a day. In fact, 4-year-old British girls ask 400 questions a day. The boys only ask 300. This probably explains why when we grow up, we don't stop and ask directions when we get lost. But I digress. The fact is that early education research tells us that our brains are 90% developed by the time we're 5 years old. 90% brain development in the first 5 years of our lives. don't you think those hundreds of questions a day play a part in that development? So why and when do we stop? How much learning is lost over the next 50 years of our lives because we stop asking those questions? So let's recap. I asked you in the beginning of this talk, what was the job of a question? And the easy answer is to elicit an answer, to learn something, find something out. And that's true. That's one thing a question does. But we just learned that questions increase engagement. We just learned that questions improve recall. Questions sharpen focus. Questions amplify intent and even change behavior. So what do we do with this? Well, I'll leave that to you, but with a few questions. What if, as parents, we did a little less lecturing to our kids and a little more inquiring about their hopes, dreams, aspirations, fears, challenges, likes, dislikes, values? What if, as business leaders, we did a little less directing and order giving and a little more coaching and empowering by drawing out the best of our team through questions? Now imagine this. What if politicians at town hall meetings had to sit on a stage like this and look out into the audience, and instead of fielding questions, they had to ask the audience questions and just listen to what the audience thinks about things? What if we all returned to our primal method of learning, innovation, and creativity, the question? I'll leave you with this. What's one thing you learned or picked up from this talk? Why is that important? How can you use it in your life? And what questions does it generate for you? Thank you for sharing this time with me.